Maya Chen worked double shifts to keep a roof over her head. When she dared to organize her neighbors against illegal rent hikes, her landlord had her evicted and stripped of her nursing license overnight. Victor Hale had inherited every brick of his empire without lifting a finger. He believed owning the building meant owning the people inside it, until Maya Chen proved him catastrophically wrong. It started with a notice slipped under the door. Another illegal rent increase, the third that year. Maya didn't just complain. She built a coalition, and Victor Hale decided to make her pay for it. She had no lawyers, no connections, no safety net. He had city council members on speed dial, but Maya Chen had something Victor never understood, a community that refused to let her fall alone. Victor celebrated her destruction like a victory lap. He spent recklessly, cut corrupt deals, and burned every ally who questioned him. He never saw Maya quietly rebuilding until it was already too late. One leaked inspection report. Dozens of falsified documents. Maya handed investigators everything, and the city began pulling threads from Victor's empire that unraveled faster than anyone had anticipated. Federal marshals don't care how many penthouses you own. Victor Hale sat alone in his tower watching everything collapse, not because Maya took revenge, but because his own greed finally found its reckoning. Maya Chen had been awake since 4 in the morning, which was not unusual. She moved through the hospital corridors with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned long ago that exhaustion was not an excuse the sick could afford. 12 hours on her feet, managing medications, holding hands through fear, absorbing grief that had nowhere else to go. She did this not because it was easy, but because she genuinely believed that showing up for people in their worst moments was the most honest thing a person could do with their time. By the time her shift ended, the city outside was beginning to breathe again. Maya barely noticed. She was already thinking about tomorrow. The apartment was small, but she had made it hers over 3 careful years. A shelf of nursing textbooks beside a window she kept cracked open for the sound of rain. A kitchen that smelled like jasmine tea and whatever she managed to cook between double shifts. The building itself was aging with more dignity than its landlord deserved, its walls thick with the quiet lives of people who worked too hard for too little and still paid their rent on time every single month. Maya never thought of it as luxurious. She thought of it as stable, and after the years she had spent rebuilding herself from nothing, stable was everything. Diane Vasquez from the 3rd floor appeared at Maya's door on a Tuesday evening, still wearing her grocery store vest, eyes red from something she was trying to hold together. She held a folded paper in both hands, like it was evidence of a crime, which, in a way, it was. She told Maya that her rent was going up $340 starting next month, that she had checked with the others, and that it was happening to everyone in the building. She asked Maya what they were supposed to do. Maya looked at the paper for a long moment, then stepped aside and let Diane in. She put the kettle on. The notice arrived on official letterhead, dense with legal language designed to make an illegal act feel inevitable. Victor Hale's property management company had printed it in clean corporate font, as though the formatting alone could launder the intention behind it. Maya read it twice, then a 3rd time, slowly. The increase was far beyond what the city's rent stabilization ordinance permitted. She had looked up the law, she had taken notes. The notice cited vague language about building improvements that had never visibly occurred. Standing in her kitchen under the hum of a flickering bulb she had reported to maintenance twice, Maya felt the specific cold clarity that comes when someone with power decides you simply do not matter. They gathered in the laundry room on a Wednesday night because it was the one common space without a camera pointed directly at it. 11 tenants crowded between the folding tables and the dryers, voices low, faces tight with the particular stress of people who could not afford to lose. Maya stood at the front, not because she had appointed herself, but because she was the one who had done the research, printed the forms, and brought the extra chairs. She explained what a tenant union was, what protections it afforded, and what their rights actually were under city law. Some people looked scared, some looked grateful. All of them signed the petition. Maya folded it carefully and put it in her bag. Victor Hale reviewed his property portfolio the way some men reviewed their reflections, with the satisfaction that had nothing to do with effort and everything to do with inheritance. He sat at a desk his father had owned in a penthouse his father had purchased, scrolling through rental income figures on a tablet he used for very little else. He had not renovated a single unit in 4 years. He had not spoken to a tenant directly in longer than that. His property manager handled the complaints, the lawyers handled the rest, and Victor handled the lifestyle those numbers made possible. When a flagged item appeared in the report about tenant organizing at the Caldwell building, he did not read it carefully. He simply picked up his phone. Maya sat at the public library's filing station for 2 hours, working through the city's tenant union registration process with the focused attention she brought to everything that mattered. The forms were not complicated, but they required precision, and she was precise. A volunteer paralegal from a tenant rights nonprofit sat beside her and confirmed each section as she completed it. When the submission went through and the confirmation number appeared on the screen, something shifted in Maya's chest. Not triumph, exactly. More like the feeling of having planted something in solid ground. She photographed the confirmation page, emailed it to herself, and texted Diane the news. Diane sent back 3 exclamation points and a heart. Maya allowed herself a small smile. Victor did not consider the call a favor. He considered it maintenance, the routine upkeep of relationships he had cultivated over years of donations and dinners, and the kind of access that never appeared in any public record. Councilman Pruitt answered on the second ring and listened without interrupting, which was itself a measure of how well Victor had invested in that silence. Victor explained the tenant organizing situation calmly, framing it as a nuisance, a disruption to responsible property management. He mentioned the union paperwork specifically. Pruitt asked 2 clarifying questions, then said he understood. No promises were made aloud. They never were. Victor hung up, feeling the effortless confidence of a man who had never once needed to solve his own problems. The eviction notice appeared on Maya's door on a Friday morning, taped there while she was sleeping between a night shift and an afternoon one. The grounds cited were procedural, the kind that require lawyers to untangle and time to contest, both of which Victor knew she had very little of. Alongside it, tucked without explanation into her building mailbox, was a termination letter from the hospital's HR department, citing a complaint filed with the state nursing board about her professional conduct. Maya did not yet know how the 2 documents were connected, but she held them both in her hands in the hallway and understood, without needing the full picture, that this was not coincidence. Someone had made a decision about her life. She stood in the hallway for a long time after the other tenants' doors had closed again. The fluorescent light above her flickered the way it always did, the way maintenance had never fixed, the way she had stopped expecting anyone to fix. She read both documents again, slowly, looking for the language that might give her a way in, a seam to pull, a procedural error she could use. Her hands were steady. She had steadied her hands through worse than this in hospitals, in waiting rooms, in her own life before this building and this job had given her something to stand on. The steadiness did not mean she was not afraid. It meant she had decided that fear was not going to be the thing that moved her next. Diane wept openly when the movers arrived at her door, which she had not expected to do. She had told herself she was prepared, had packed her own boxes, had made the arrangements with her sister across town. But something about watching strangers carry her kitchen table through a door she had walked through 10,000 ordinary times broke something open in her. Maya was there, standing in the hallway, having come straight from a night she had not slept through. She did not try to stop the crying or offer silver linings. She just stood close enough that Diane knew she was not alone in the particular grief of being displaced from the life you had carefully built on someone else's terms. Victor poured himself a glass of something expensive that evening and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, looking out at the city with the uncomplicated satisfaction of a man who had confused winning with being right. He had not thought about Maya Chen specifically. He had thought about the problem, and the problem was resolved. He raised his glass to no one in particular and drank. The apartment was large and quiet in the way that spaces are quiet when they have never been shared with anyone who truly mattered. He put music on. He ordered dinner. He did not once consider that what he had just done to 2 women who had done nothing wrong to him might eventually constitute a kind of debt. He was not built for that kind of accounting. Maya slept on her colleague Priya's couch for 6 weeks. She kept her things in 2 bags under the coffee table and woke early enough each morning to fold her blanket and restore the living room before Priya's kids came downstairs for school. She was grateful, deeply and genuinely, and she said so every few days in small, practical ways because words felt insufficient. But gratitude and stability are not the same thing, and Maya knew better than most what it cost a person to live indefinitely in someone else's space. She spent her evenings researching housing law and filing appeals and applying to reinstatement pathways for her nursing license. She kept a notebook. She made lists. She moved forward because standing still had never once kept anyone safe. James Holbrook had been the floor supervisor at St. Aldrich's Hospital for 11 years, and he called Maya into his office on a Tuesday afternoon with the expression of a man who was about to do something he disliked but had decided he could live with. He slid a printed document across the desk, an official letter from the state nursing board confirming a formal complaint had been received and that her credentials were under review pending investigation. He told her he had no choice but to suspend her access to patient floors in the interim. He told her he was sorry. He meant it. She could see that. But sorry did not change what the letter said, and Maya understood that whatever network had moved against her had reached further than just her front door. The nurse on administrative duty collected Maya's badge at the front security desk with a kind of careful neutrality that people use when they want to be professional about something they find quietly devastating. Maya placed it on the desk without ceremony. She had worn that badge through some of the worst and most important nights of her life. She had worn it when patients coded and when families finally exhaled, and when she had stood in break rooms at 3 a.m, reminding herself why she had chosen this work. She walked out through the hospital's sliding doors into a gray afternoon and did not let herself look back. She had learned early that looking back in the wrong moment cost you something you needed for what came next. Victor bought a yacht he could not actually afford, which he did not realize because he had not read the financial reports his accountant had been sending him with increasing urgency over the preceding months. He named it after a word that meant freedom in Italian, which he had looked up specifically for the occasion. He threw a party on the dock to celebrate a purchase that required financing he had secured through a lender who asked fewer questions than any legitimate institution would have. His guests photographed themselves against the boat's gleaming hull and posted the images publicly. Victor stood at the center of all of it, laughing, sunburned, radiantly unaware that the ground beneath him had been quietly dissolving for the better part of a year. Maya found the article at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night, scrolling through local journalism on her phone while Priya's apartment was dark and quiet around her. It was written by a reporter named Lena Marsh for the city's independent investigative outlet, and it raised questions about a pattern of politically connected evictions across 3 properties managed by Hale Holdings. It was careful journalism, specific and sourced, but Maya could read between every line of it. She sat up slowly and read it again from the beginning. Then she searched Lena Marsh's name, read 2 more of her articles, and looked at the publication's contact information. She set her phone face down on the cushion beside her and stared at the ceiling for a moment. Then she picked it back up and started composing an email. They met at a corner diner near the courthouse district, the kind of place where the coffee arrived without being asked for and no one paid attention to anyone else's conversation. Lena Marsh was younger than Maya had expected, compact and watchful, with a recorder she placed openly on the table and a habit of writing notes in the margins of her own printed articles. Maya told her story plainly and without performance, beginning with the rent notices and ending with the hospital badge she was no longer allowed to wear. Lena listened without interrupting, which was its own form of respect. When Maya finished, Lena looked at her notes for a moment and said that she had been waiting for someone with Maya's specific vantage point for the better part of 4 months. She pressed record. Lena filed a formal public records request for the building inspection reports on all 6 Hale Holdings properties the morning after meeting with Maya, citing 3 specific years in which structural complaints had been filed, but no violations had appeared in the city's official records. The request landed on the desk of a city archivist named Margaret, who processed these things with methodical efficiency and no particular interest in who was asking or why. 3 days later, a digital file arrived in Lena's inbox. She opened the documents, cross-referenced them against the original complaint logs, and leaned back slowly in her chair. The numbers did not match. In several cases, they did not come close. She highlighted the discrepancies in yellow and drafted a list of questions for the city's building inspection office. The story had just become something much larger. Tommy Reyes had worked for Hale Holdings' contracted inspection firm for 6 years. and he had told himself for most of that time that he was simply doing his job, that the reports he filed were technically accurate within a certain margin, that everyone in the industry understood how these things worked. He told himself these things less convincingly with every passing month. When Lena Marsh appeared at his office door with a printed copy of a report he had personally signed off on alongside the original complaint documentation it was supposed to reflect, he sat with the papers in his hands for a long time without speaking. He was not a bad man. He was a man who had made incremental compromises until the distance between where he started and where he stood had become too large to keep pretending he hadn't traveled it. Tommy called his own lawyer that evening, before calling anyone else, and spent an hour and 40 minutes on the phone working through what cooperation with federal investigators would require and what it might protect him from. His lawyer was measured and honest and told him plainly that the window for voluntary cooperation typically mattered a great deal in how these cases concluded. Tommy sat in his car in his own driveway long after the call ended, engine off, staring at the dashboard. He thought about the 6 years of incremental yeses that had brought him here. He thought about his kids asleep in the house behind him. He thought about the fact that someone had already lost her home and her job because of paperwork that bore his signature. He called Lena Marsh the following morning and said he was ready to talk. Victor's attorney delivered the news in the conference room of his own firm, which was a courtesy Victor did not fully appreciate. The attorney laid out the situation methodically. The federal inquiry into falsified inspection records, the subpoenas already issued to 3 former contractors, the financial irregularities in the yacht transaction that had attracted the attention of a separate regulatory body, and the quiet but definitive withdrawal of Victor's primary lender from any further dealings. Victor listened with the expression of a man waiting to be told what phone call would fix it. His attorney recognized that expression and chose his next sentence very carefully. He explained that there was no phone call, there was no contact, there was no connection that had not already read the situation and begun quietly arranging distance from it. Victor asked him to repeat that. Councilman Pruitt gave a brief statement to a local news outlet on a Thursday afternoon, which his communications director had drafted with considerable care. The statement expressed the councilman's deep commitment to housing justice and tenant protections, his full cooperation with any legitimate investigations into improper conduct by property management companies, and his lack of any substantive relationship with Victor Hale beyond occasional professional acquaintance in civic contexts. He described Victor's alleged conduct as troubling. He said the word troubling twice. Maya watched the clip on her phone and felt something that was not quite satisfaction but was adjacent to it. She had not needed Pruitt to be punished. She had only needed him to stop being useful. The statement confirmed he had calculated that Victor was no longer worth the liability of loyalty. Lena's story ran on a Tuesday evening, picked up within the hour by 3 regional outlets and by morning by 2 national ones. It was thorough and measured and devastating in the specific way that good investigative journalism is when it has been built slowly and sourced carefully over months. It named Victor Hale directly. It named Councilman Pruitt in connection with the politically facilitated evictions. It named the inspection firm and traced the pattern of falsified records across 5 years of filings. It included Maya's account, identified only as a former tenant and healthcare worker whose credentials were under review, told in her own clear words without embellishment. The story did not editorialize. It did not need to. The documents spoke in a register that required no amplification. Federal investigators entered the lobby of Hale Holdings' downtown office building on a Thursday morning before 9 o'clock, which was deliberate. 2 agents presented credentials at the front desk, while 3 others moved toward the elevator with a court order for records access. The staff in the lobby reacted with the stunned stillness of people encountering a situation their training had not covered. Victor was not in the building. He had been advised by his attorney to remain at the penthouse and to say nothing to anyone. He watched the footage from his building's lobby security system on his phone from 42 floors above the street, and for the first time in a long time, he had no one to call who would make something go away. There was simply the footage and the silence and the understanding that this was real. Maya received the letter from the state nursing board on a Friday afternoon, 3 months after Lena's story broke, and 2 weeks after Councilman Pruitt's office had quietly confirmed to investigators that the original board complaint had been filed through a channel he now characterized as inappropriate. The letter reinstated her credentials in full and noted that the complaint had been withdrawn and administratively closed following a review of its origins. Maya read it standing at Priya's kitchen counter. She read it again. Then she sat down at the table and pressed her hands flat against the wood and breathed. It was not everything she had lost. It was not the months of uncertainty or the couch or the 2 bags under the coffee table, but it was the thing that mattered most. She was a nurse again. Victor stood alone at the penthouse window in the early evening of a Tuesday in November, looking out at the same city view he had always had, which now felt like something borrowed rather than something owned. The federal case was moving forward. His portfolio had been frozen pending investigation. 3 of his 6 properties had been placed under city receivership. His social circle, which had always been less a circle of genuine warmth than a rotation of people sustained by proximity to his spending, had redistributed itself with efficient indifference in the direction of other opportunities. The penthouse itself was still technically his for now, but the word his had begun to feel provisional in a way it never had before. He stood there for a long time in the quiet, and the quiet gave him nothing back. Maya and Diane found a place together on the east side of the city, a 2-bedroom in a building managed by a non-profit housing organization, affordable and clean and governed by a tenant board that actually met. They moved in on a Saturday in December, assembling furniture and unpacking boxes to music Diane played from her phone, stopping periodically to argue pleasantly about where things should go. That evening, they sat at the small kitchen table with mugs of tea while the heat worked properly and the lights stayed on. They talked for a while about ordinary things, about shifts and grocery lists and the plant Diane had brought from her old apartment that had somehow survived everything. Outside, the city continued. Somewhere across it, Victor Hale's reckoning continued too. Not because Maya had sought it, but because his own choices had always been building toward it.